My name is Alara Vance. For the first 26 years of my life, that name felt less like an identity and more like a half-finished sentence, waiting for someone else to complete it. I grew up in the quiet, historic city of Port's End, a place of old brick and sea salt air, where cobblestone alleys whisper stories of the past to the new glass towers that rise against the Atlantic sky. It's a city that holds its history close, a quality I've always admired, and one I shared, perhaps too deeply, with my own family. My childhood was a watercolor painting, soft edges, muted tones, and a persistent, gentle rain that seemed to blur any sharp lines of conflict or joy. It was comfortable, predictable, and profoundly safe. That sense of safety, I would come to learn, was a carefully constructed cage. The email arrived on a Tuesday in early April, the kind of day in Port's End where the sun is a pale, uncertain wafer behind a thin veil of cloud. I was sitting in my modest, decade-old car in the guest parking lot of the Sterling and Finch headquarters, the engine off, the silence ringing in my ears. The rejection. I read the words on my phone screen, my interview suit, a hopeful charcoal gray, still feeling crisp and foreign against my skin. Thank you for your interest in the Urban Design Fellowship. After careful consideration, we have decided to move forward with other candidates. A whole 35 minutes. That's how long it had taken them. 35 minutes from the moment I'd stepped out of their lobby to the arrival of this digital dismissal. My portfolio, a culmination of my master's degree from Penn and a year of sleepless nights, lay unopened on the passenger seat, a silent, leather-bound testament to a conversation that never happened. I stared up at the building, a magnificent juxtaposition of a preserved 19th-century mercantile exchange and a soaring, modern glass atrium. It was the architectural embodiment of Port's End itself, and the place my mother, Catherine Vance, had called her professional home for 23 years. She had started as a research assistant and ascended, with formidable grace and quiet tenacity, to become the head of legacy accounts, a gatekeeper of the firm's oldest and most powerful clients. And as a sick, cold certainty began to crystallize in my gut, I knew she had just become the gatekeeper of my future, too, slamming the door before I'd even had a chance to knock. It would be 8 months before I saw the security footage that confirmed the shape of my suspicion, but the memory of that morning was already playing on a loop in my mind, stark and clear. I had arrived early, a bundle of nerves and meticulously practiced talking points. As I was signing in at the monolithic marble reception desk, the executive elevator doors slid open with a gentle chime. My mother emerged, a vision of corporate elegance in a navy blue dress, her expression a perfect mask of pleasant surprise. "Alara," she'd said, her voice carrying the soft, modulated tone she used for clients and board members. "Darling, what a surprise. What are you doing here?" "I have an interview, Mom," I'd answered, my own voice sounding thin and young by comparison. "For the Urban Design Fellowship." Her face did a complex, fleeting thing, a brief tightening around her eyes, a subtle downward turn of her lips, before the placid, maternal smile resurfaced. "Oh my goodness. That's wonderfully ambitious of you." She placed a cool hand on my arm, a gesture that felt less like affection and more like an assessment. "Sterling and Finch is a formidable place, darling. They typically recruit from a very specific, very seasoned pool of talent. I have a Master of Urban Planning from the University of Pennsylvania," I reminded her, the words feeling defensive despite my best efforts. "I graduated with honors." "Of course you did," she said, her smile unwavering. She glanced at her elegant watch. "Well, I'm on my way to a meeting with the board. I wish you the very best of luck, Alara. Break a leg." But she hadn't gone to a meeting with the board. The time-stamped footage would later show her striding with purpose down the opposite corridor, directly to the office of Mr. Alastair Finch, the firm's aging, venerable CEO. I would watch the silent film of her performance, her bypassing his secretary with an assured nod, the closing of the heavy oak door, the 10 minutes of animated conversation. Though there was no audio, her gestures spoke volumes. The sharp, slicing motions of her hands, the earnest leaning forward, the shake of her head. Decades of observing her had taught me her nonverbal language. I could almost hear the words, phrases she had polished to a high sheen over the years of my life. She's just not ready. A little emotionally fragile, you know how creatives can be. I worry she's setting herself up for a fall. This firm can't afford to take a risk on sentiment. Mr. Finch, a man who had known my mother for over 2 decades and trusted her judgment implicitly, would have listened. He would have nodded. And he would have made a call. My interview was a polite, perfunctory formality, a ghost of a meeting that was over before it began. They had torpedoed my chances from the inside. That evening, my mother called, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "I heard the news about the fellowship, darling. I'm so very sorry. But you know," she continued, her tone shifting to one of gentle guidance, "I've been thinking, and perhaps it's for the best. A place like Sterling and Finch, it's so corporate, so rigid. It would have crushed your beautiful creative spirit. You're meant for something more soulful. Have you considered looking at the Ports End Historical Society? They do wonderful work." I stood in my small apartment, the lights of the harbor twinkling like scattered diamonds in the distance, and felt a profound, seismic shift inside me. It was the feeling of a foundation cracking. For the first time in my 26 years, I did something I had never done before. I pressed the red icon on my phone screen, ending the call without a word. The silence that followed was terrifying and thrilling. It was the sound of a boundary being drawn, a line in the sand I knew I could never uncross. This pattern, this gentle, loving sabotage, was the wallpaper of my childhood. It wasn't loud or overtly cruel, it was far more insidious than that. It was the science fair diorama of the solar system, my pride and joy, found with its planets mysteriously crushed on the morning of the presentation, followed by her comforting hug and the whisper of, "Oh honey, maybe these things are just too much pressure for you." It was the application for a prestigious summer arts program that vanished from the stack of mail on her desk, only for her to say weeks later, "I'm so sorry, it must have gotten lost. But it would have been so lonely for you, all those miles from home." Her refrain was always the same, delivered with a sigh of maternal wisdom. "I'm only trying to protect you from disappointment, Alara. The world is a harsh and competitive place. It's better to set your sights a little lower and be pleasantly surprised than to aim for the stars and get burned." But this felt different. This wasn't a school project or a summer camp. This was my career. My life's passion. This was the first significant step into the world I had spent years preparing for, and she hadn't just discouraged it. She had actively, meticulously, and successfully destroyed it in the one place where her influence was absolute. She had used her power not to lift me up, but to hold me down, all while smiling and calling it love. The week that followed was a blur of quiet fury and methodical research. I didn't sleep. I lived on coffee and a burning sense of injustice, channeling my grief into a forensic examination of Sterling and Finch. I downloaded their annual reports, combed through shareholder newsletters, and read every article and press release I could find. The picture that emerged was of a company resting on its laurels. It was a respected institution, solid and profitable, but stagnant. Their vision was rooted in the past, their digital presence was an afterthought, and their stock, while stable, hadn't shown any real growth in a decade. It was deep in the footnotes of a quarterly SEC filing that I found it. The key. The Finch Family Legacy Trust held a controlling 52% of the company's shares. And the trust charter contained a fascinating, archaic succession clause. If a direct heir of Alastair Finch was not serving in an active, senior leadership role within the company by the time of the trust's 75th anniversary, the controlling interest was to be divested and sold to ensure the family's financial security. The 75th anniversary was in 18 months. Mr. Finch was 68, a widower with no children. His only living relatives were a handful of cousins and a nephew who, according to a society column I unearthed, was a blissfully uninterested ceramicist living in Taos. The family, it seemed, was looking for a graceful exit. That night, with the rain tapping softly against my window pane, I called my father. Thomas and Catherine had divorced when I was 10, a quiet, sorrowful parting that had left him on the West Coast and me in the gentle, suffocating orbit of my mother. He'd since built a successful career in sustainable tech, and more importantly, he had never forgotten the subtle ways Catherine had tried to paint him as an unreliable, unstable dreamer during their custody hearings. He understood her methods. "Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have a strange question. If you needed to, how much capital could you and your network pull together?" There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of waves in the background. "Alara? Is everything okay? What is this for?" "I want to build a coalition of investors," I said, the idea taking full shape even as I spoke it. "To acquire a controlling interest in Sterling and Finch." The silence on the line was longer this time, but it was a different kind of silence. It was thoughtful, analytical. Then, a low chuckle rumbled through the phone. "You want to buy your mother's company?" It wasn't a question. "I want to buy the company that wouldn't even interview me because my mother told them I was a liability," I clarified, the words tasting like metal. His laughter was louder now, not dark or vengeful, but filled with a kind of appreciative wonder. "I know some people," he said, his tone shifting, becoming energized. "Impact investors, private equity folks who love an undervalued legacy asset. They'd see the potential." "What's the current market cap?" "At today's valuation, we'd need around $150 million for a controlling stake." "Give me a few weeks to make some calls," he said. "Then fly out here. We'll build a plan." It took us not weeks, but 8 long months. 8 months of my life lived in a strange, secret dual reality. By day, I took a freelance drafting job with a small local firm in Port's End, paying my rent and keeping up appearances. By night, I was on calls with my father and a growing team of investors, building the financial models, a new business plan, and the legal framework for our acquisition. We formed the New Horizons Group, a name my father suggested, and structured it carefully to obscure my involvement. On paper, I was a junior strategy consultant, my name buried deep within the organizational charts. The negotiations were complex but ultimately smooth. The Finch family was ready to sell. They saw in our offer a way to secure their wealth and pass the torch without a fuss. Alistair Finch was tired of the relentless pace of modern business. He wanted to retire to his sailboat and the sea. We closed the deal on a crisp Thursday in late autumn, the air in Port's End smelling of wood smoke and fallen leaves. I was 27 years old, and I was now the majority owner of the company that had defined my mother's life and so nearly derailed my own. "When do you want to make the announcement?" my father asked over a celebratory dinner in San Francisco a few days later. "Monday morning," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "I'll fly back Sunday. An all-hands meeting. But Dad, don't tell anyone on the ground who the new principal of New Horizons is. I want to be the one to introduce myself." That weekend was a chrysalis. I didn't buy a power suit. Instead, I found a simple, beautifully tailored wool dress in a shade of deep forest green, an outfit that made me feel not powerful, but centered. I had my hair cut into a style that was clean and professional, but still felt like me. And I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room, not practicing a speech of revenge, but rehearsing a story of renewal. Every word was chosen with care, not to cut, but to build. I wasn't just returning as an owner. I was returning as myself, whole and complete, everything my mother had quietly, lovingly, tried to convince me I could never be. Monday dawned gray and damp, the sky over Port's End the color of slate. The main auditorium at Sterling and Finch could seat 300, and it was standing room only. The air was thick with a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. Mr. Finch stood at the podium, looking more relaxed and content than I had ever seen him. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice warm and familiar. "As the rumors have confirmed, Sterling and Finch has been acquired by a new investment group, the New Horizons Group. This transition represents a vital and exciting new chapter for our firm, a chance to build upon our legacy while embracing the future. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce you to the new majority partner and CEO." I stood in the wings, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. I could see my mother in the front row, seated among the other senior partners. She was impeccable, composed, her expression carefully neutral. She had weathered leadership changes before. She was a survivor. She was likely already calculating her angle, her approach to the new boss. Mr. Finch smiled. "Please join me in welcoming Ms. Alara Vance." A sound, a small, sharp intake of breath, was audible from the front row. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. I walked onto the stage, the warm light washing over me. I felt as if I were moving through water, the hundreds of faces a blur, except for one. One face, which I knew as well as my own, had gone utterly pale, her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. "Good morning," I said, my voice clear and even as it filled the silent room. "I'm so honored to be here. Sterling and Finch is a firm I have admired for a very, very long time." I let my eyes drift over the crowd before letting them land gently on my mother. "Some of you may not know this, but I was actually here about 8 months ago. I interviewed for the Urban Design Fellowship." A soft murmur rippled through the audience. My mother's hands were now clenched tightly in her lap, her knuckles white against the dark leather of her portfolio. "I didn't get the position," I continued, a small, sad smile touching my lips. "But the experience taught me an invaluable lesson. Sometimes, when a door is close to you, it forces you to look for another way in. Sometimes, you have to find a path you never would have considered, a path that leads you to a place you couldn't have imagined." I paused, letting the words settle. "And sometimes, if you believe in the potential of a place deeply enough, you don't just find a new way in. You build a new door." The nervous laughter was replaced by an attentive silence. I know what some of you might be thinking. I'm 27. I'm young. You might think I'm here because of family money or some inherited privilege. But I am here because I and my partners at New Horizons see the incredible, untapped potential within these walls. We see what Sterling and Finch can be. For the next 30 minutes, I walked them through my vision. Not a vision of ruthless cuts and hostile takeovers, but one of thoughtful growth. I spoke of revitalizing Port Said's forgotten waterfront districts, of investing in sustainable architecture, of creating a new division dedicated to community-focused urban planning. I spoke of fostering a culture of mentorship and collaboration. My master's thesis, the one they never read, had become my blueprint for the company's future. "Our greatest asset isn't our portfolio of legacy clients," I said, my gaze sweeping across the room and once again coming to rest on my mother. "It's our people. It's the talent and creativity in this room. And from this day forward, we are going to be a company that invests in that talent. We are going to build people up, not hold them back. We will reward merit, not just tenure. We will nurture potential, not politics." When I finished, the applause was hesitant at first, then grew into something warm, something genuine. It was the sound of hope. In the front row, my mother did not clap. She sat perfectly still, a statue carved from ice. "I will be scheduling one-on-one meetings with all department heads over the coming week," I concluded. "My door is always open. Thank you for your time." The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with conversation. I remained on the stage, watching them go, until only 2 people were left in the vast, empty auditorium, me and my mother. She rose slowly from her seat, her movements stiff, and walked to the foot of the stage. "How?" she whispered, the single word hanging in the air between us. "New Horizons Group," I said softly, walking down the steps to stand on the same level as her. "Dad helped me organize the financing. Your father." She said his name like it was a curse. "Of course." This was always about him, about his petty need for revenge. "No," I said, shaking my head. I stopped a few feet away from her, maintaining the space that had always existed between us. "This was never about him. This is about capability. This is about vision. You once told a friend of yours, I overheard you, that you worried I was too sensitive for the real world. You were right, in a way. I am sensitive. I'm sensitive to wasted potential. I'm sensitive to a culture that fears new ideas. And that's why, as my first official act, I'm initiating a comprehensive performance and cultural review of all senior leadership." Her composure cracked further. "You can't be serious. I own 52% of this company, Mother. I am very serious. My voice was not sharp, but it was firm, the voice of the woman I had become over the last 8 months. "I'm just trying to protect the company from disappointment," I said, hearing the faint, sad echo of her own words. "The business world is harsh. It's important to make sure we have the right people in the right seats to face it." Her review was scheduled for Friday afternoon. I spent the week in a marathon of meetings, listening to her colleagues, department heads, and even their assistants. They spoke of her institutional knowledge, her unwavering dedication, her formidable client relationships. All of it was true. But I also saw the other side of the ledger. I read the exit interviews of bright young associates who left because they felt stifled and undervalued. I saw a pattern in project assignments, where innovative but risky ideas were consistently shelved in favor of safer, more predictable ones. I saw the ghost of my own experience mirrored in the careers of others who had been subtly sidelined. Her management style was not malice, it was a deeply ingrained fear of failure, a fear she projected onto me and onto the company itself. On Friday, she entered my new office, Alastair Finch's old office, with its panoramic view of Port's End Harbor, and sat in the chair opposite the large mahogany desk. She was dressed in her professional armor, her expression unreadable. "Catherine," I began, using her first name to establish a professional boundary. "Thank you for coming in. Let's talk about your future with Sterling and Finch." "I have given this firm 23 years of my life, Alara," she said, her voice tight. "You have," I agreed. "And the firm is grateful for that service. But in those years, the culture you've fostered in your department has also led to a 30% higher turnover rate for junior talent than any other division. You've championed stability at the cost of innovation. You have, with the best of intentions I'm sure, created what our consultants are calling a risk-averse feedback loop. Those are corporate buzzwords. They mean nothing." I slid a thin file across the polished surface of the desk. It didn't contain security footage or accusatory emails. It contained data. Attrition rates, project profitability analyses, 360-degree review summaries, all anonymized. It was a portrait of a department that was successful on paper, but slowly, quietly suffocating. She opened it. Her expression didn't change as she scanned the pages, but I saw the slight tremor in her hand. "What is it you want from me?" she finally asked, her eyes lifting to meet mine. "I want you to understand," I said, leaning forward. "My chair. My desk. Every time you told me to be careful, I learned to be bold. Every time you tried to shield me from a challenge, you forced me to become more resilient. Every time you whispered that I wasn't ready, you lit a fire in me to prove I was. So, in a strange and painful way, I have you to thank for the person sitting in this chair today. You inadvertently forged the one person who could see this company's flaws with enough love to want to fix them." A single, crystalline tear traced a path down her cheek, a crack in the marble facade. "Are you firing me?" "No," I said softly. "That's not what this is about. I'm offering you a choice. Your current role as head of legacy accounts is being phased out as we restructure. I've created a new position, Director of Community Partnerships. It's a smaller team. It's a different kind of work. It's about building from the ground up, based on the new vision. It would require you to learn new skills, to embrace a new way of thinking. You can have that role. You can prove you're part of the future of this company, not just its past." I paused. "Or you can resign. A full severance package, a generous pension, a clean and dignified exit. The choice is entirely yours." She stared at me for a long time, and in her eyes, I saw a flicker of the mother I used to know, the one who bandaged my scraped knees and read me stories at night. Then it was gone, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. She was looking at a stranger. Perhaps I was. The daughter she had raised would have taken the job at the Historical Society. She would have believed in her own limitations. That girl had vanished in a parking lot 8 months ago. "I'll resign," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Effective at the end of the day." "Okay," I nodded. "I'll have HR draw up the papers." She stood, smoothed her dress, and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. "Was it worth it, Alara? All of this, just to prove me wrong?" "I didn't do this to prove you wrong," I said, my own voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "It wasn't triumph. It was grief. I did this to prove myself right. There's a difference. She left without another word. I walked to the vast window and watched as, an hour later, she exited the building for the last time. She wasn't carrying a cardboard box. Her departure was more elegant than that. But she looked smaller against the grand facade of the building, a figure receding into the past. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my father. "Your mother called me. She's struggling." I looked out at the harbor, at the boats sailing toward the open sea. "I know," I typed back. "We all are, in our own way." Sterling and Finch, under its new name, Sterling Horizons, did not just survive, it blossomed. We poured resources into the city, funding the revitalization of a derelict pier into a public park, designing a new, low-income housing development that won national awards. Our stock price tripled in 2 years. I sought out and hired some of the most innovative young minds in the field, creating the collaborative, dynamic culture I had dreamed of. The company my mother had tried to preserve in amber became a living, breathing entity, deeply engaged with the world around it. I saw her again 2 years later at a fundraising gala for a youth arts foundation. Our company was the lead sponsor. I was on stage to present a large check, speaking about the importance of giving young people the tools and the confidence to pursue their wildest ambitions, especially when the world tells them to be small. She approached me during the cocktail hour, a glass of champagne in her hand. She looked well, if a little more fragile around the eyes. "The firm looks good, Alara," she said, her voice even. "You've done remarkable things." "The team has done remarkable things," I corrected gently. I just opened the windows and let the fresh air in. She swirled her champagne, not looking at me. "I've been speaking to someone. A therapist." She said the word as if it were a foreign object in her mouth. "She says I was projecting. That my own fear of not being good enough, of failing, was so immense that I couldn't bear the thought of you experiencing it. So I tried to build a smaller, safer world for you. A world without risk." She finally looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. She asked me if I was afraid you would fail. But I think the truth is, I was terrified you would succeed. That you would fly so high you wouldn't need me anymore. "I was always going to fly, Mom," I said, and the words were filled with a deep, aching sorrow for all the years we had lost. "You just couldn't see it. Or maybe you did, and that was the problem." She nodded slowly, a tear finally escaping. "For what it's worth," she whispered, "I am so proud of you." I looked at her, at this woman who was my origin story, the source of my deepest wound and my greatest strength. "I think you're impressed," I said, the distinction clear and sharp in my own heart, but I said it without malice, only a quiet truth. "And that's a start. Being proud would have meant you were there for the climb. Being impressed means you're surprised I made it to the summit." I gave her a small, final nod and walked away, back to the life I had built. There was no grand reconciliation, no tearful embrace that healed all wounds. Some bridges, once they have crumbled, can't be rebuilt in the same way. They leave a space in the landscape, a canyon that you learn to navigate around. You can stand on opposite sides and admire the view, but you may never be able to cross it again. My company is my own. It is built on the vision she tried to temper, funded by the connections she sought to dismiss, and thriving beyond the limits she tried to set. In our new lobby, carved into a wall of reclaimed local oak, is our guiding principle: build the horizon. It's a reminder to every person who walks through our doors that their potential is limitless, that their vision matters. Every morning, I sit at my desk, the one I was never meant to have, and I look out at the city I am helping to shape. I no longer think of my mother's words as a curse, but as a catalyst. She taught me that the most confining walls are the ones we cannot see. And the most important work we can ever do is learn to tear them down, brick by loving, painful, necessary brick, until we are finally standing in the open air, free to build a world of our own design.